Hello, I'm Bob the Booker and welcome to my channel and another video, another location as I sort of trundle around looking after dogs. But here I am and here are the books that I have read this week. I hope you've been having a really good reading week and let's get started. First up, I spoke a little bit about this in the last weekly wrap-up, but I read In Her Jaws by Rosamund Taylor. And this is a selection of poems. She is this really sort of interesting person. I think from the couple of poems I'd read last time when I spoke about it, I kind of thought this would be a very different collection to what it was. And I'm very glad that I was proven wrong. I think this is a really interesting set of poems that largely focuses on a lot of aspects of I suppose the experience of being both queer and a woman and various other things. She talks quite a lot in this about violence and it kind of comes up in a few ways, this sort of spectre that kind of lingers over some of her relationships and some of her encounters with people and sort of just largely sort of going around the world. But also these poems full of absolute love. There's this sort of set of poems dedicated to her her partner, I think her wife, and the way she talks about her is just so loving, of sort of imagining her as various creatures. And there was just something so tender and lovely about it, which sat so beautifully alongside the more violent and sort of more heartbreaking parts of this collection as well. Next up, I read Annie Ernaux's Look at the Lights, My Love, translated by Alison L. Strayer. And this is a very short book, as most of Ernaux's books are, that is sort of in many ways preoccupied with the modern world and sort of looking at the modern world through the lens of the supermarket. And so she does talk about broader things as well as just supermarkets. But I think the thing that's really interesting here is just the way that, that she talks about modern technology. So she sort of almost does it through the lens of a supermarket opening up and everybody suddenly having access to these various goods, and how that changes not only the local makeup of society, because people are maybe going to this one big supermarket instead of lots of smaller shops and being part of the community, but also this kind of wider thing around modernization. And so it's sort of in sort of typical Ernaux fashion. I love how she takes as a starting point one or two very small things and blows them up into a much wider exploration of the world and what's going on. So yeah, I just really enjoyed this. And I listened to it as an audiobook via Scribd, but I think it's sort of due an actual physical release at some point this year, I believe, at least in the UK. But yeah, just as always, just always fun to see Ernaux. And now it's at the point where I think, because I've read a fair few Annie Ernaux books, if I see one that I haven't read, I sort of am like, well, I have to read it now, because it's sort of a completionism thing of like, well, I've read most of them. So yeah, but no, it's really fun to kind of dip back into Annie Ernaux's universe for a little bit. Next, and kind of completely unintentional for Women in Translation Month, this is my second woman in translation this week, and that is Katja Oskamp with Marzahn, Mon Amour, translated by Joan Heinrich. And I really loved this. I just thought this was a really stunning book. So it's one I'd been meaning to read before. I think it was shortlisted for the Women in Translation Prize last year. And I kept on meaning to read it, and I just sort of ran out a bit of time, and then it was Christmas and whatever. And I found it as an audiobook and was just like, actually, yeah, why not? And I just really fell into the world of this book and really loved it. It's this sort of look at particularly East Berlin and sort of this sort of area of Germany. And in theory, the trying to talk about what this book is about sells it short, because on the surface of it, she's a chiropodist. The main character is a chiropodist who is wandering around talking about her various clients, most of whom are older, and pretty much all living in this area of Berlin. And that, yeah, on the surface sounds a little bit dull, but I think actually this book is so full of this sort of life. There's a real way that she talks about kind of people's personal stories and personal histories as she is doing various things with their feet, and how, people are ashamed of their feet and all those sorts of things, but actually part of her role is having these conversations with them. And in the meantime, they tell her all of these stories about, you know, their lives and how everything goes. We have repeat characters, well, we have these various characters, some of whom, for example, have various elements and might tell the same story again and again, or are sort of trapped in these little loops. And so she is this sort of figure, but it's never done in a way that I think is sort of pitying. It's sort of that she acknowledges these people as full people and really wants to hear their stories. And I think it just keeps building, where it's not really a book that is about plot as such. It's very interior. It's very much talking about the characters' life and stories, and the stories of other characters as well, and kind of weaving that into a sort of patchwork of Berlin and Germany more generally. So I just found this book really fascinating, and it's a really surprising book in many ways, and I think one that I just sort of urge you to stick with. I think it just is something that slowly unravels its sort of beauty as it goes. So yeah, I really, really enjoyed it. And last but not least, I read Temper by Phoebe Walker. And this is a book about a young woman who has recently moved to the Netherlands to be with her partner. And, you know, they're both sort of there working. And she has this very sort of cut off way of being around people here. So she has moved from the north of England. And the opening part of the book is talking about how when she moved from the north of England to London, she was sort of felt herself resisting the urge to be that Londoner thing, being like, oh yeah, you know, the north was horrible and whatever, and now I'm in London, look, I've got everything available to me. And so she constantly feels this sense of being a traitor to everything, to kind of her past, to her family, to all of those sorts of things. Then she moves to the Netherlands, and she sort of is sort of detached in some ways. She doesn't really have friends, she doesn't really know anybody. It's just her and her husband, and they're kind of trying to piece it together. But he has a job that is in an office and around people, and so he knows people. She is working freelance and digitally, and so she spends most of her life not really not really meeting people. So she starts to do this thing where she goes to various places, these various expat groups, to meet people, but then slowly keeps finding that her life is sorry, there's a plane going past. She keeps finding that her life just doesn't really work. She doesn't really know anybody, and she sort of falls among this set of characters who are not great in many ways, but it leads to something I really love, these sort of deep character studies of people who are quite horrible, and so she meets this person, and I don't want to give too many spoilers on this part, but she meets somebody who's basically a serial liar. And the fun thing is sort of watching our main character get frustrated with this other character, but also have to play the game of wanting to keep the peace and wanting to not upset friendship groups or not upset social groups that are all around her. So there's this sort of fun game that kind of gets played then throughout the book of this, and it just sort of builds towards quite, I think, a fun sort of I'm trying to think of a way of doing this without spoiling it, but it leads towards something quite fun where that is resolved in some way. So yeah, just a really interesting book that was a really fun thing to sort of check out. And that, I believe, takes me to the end of the books that I've read this week. I realised a lot of these are relatively short books. I'm basically in the background reading two giant chunky books, namely The Bee Sting by Paul Murray and still reading Man-Eating Typewriter by Richard Millward. And so as a result, these like little books are either audiobooks or other things I've sort of found as they've been going, which have sort of been a nice distraction from this other reading. But yeah, I've been really enjoying reading some shorter books to kind of break up some of the big chunky ones, but I will slowly get there. And I'm sort of, after The Bee Sting, I think I'll be kind of shifting a little bit more towards some of the booker ones as well. So there we go. Oh, okay, the dog's okay there. Yeah, I'm okay. Anyway, on that note, take care, and I hope you have a great week. Speak to you all soon. Bye-bye.